Hello, listeners. Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network, and I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I co-host called Higher Ed Pulse. Higher Ed Pulse is your weekly spotlight on the latest in higher education marketing and enrollment. From headline news to social posts, insider insights to industry observations, join yours truly and Seth Odell as we share top stories from across the world of higher education. Each bite-sized 15-minute episode is packed with personality and designed to bring what's top of mind to the top of your feed. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search Higher Ed Pulse wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome to Breaking Silos, where today my two guests are joining me from Hartwick College. Today I'm joined by Bryan Gross, Vice President for Enrollment Management and Athletics, and Gail Glover, Vice President for Strategic Communications at Hartwick College. Bryan and Gail, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So today we're talking about summer melt, a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts and that you all are working hard and together on addressing at Hartwick. And so Bryan, I'll start with you for just, some background on some of your initiatives around summer melt and your view on summer melt across the industry in general and how you and Gail specifically are partnering to try and combat it.
Thanks so much for having us, Shane. Reducing summer melt is absolutely critical. This year, I would say probably more than ever, as most institutions have had to deal with the complications from the delay in the FAFSA and as a result, delaying their deposit deadline. We also know that FAFSA applications are still down 15% nationally. Deposits are down at regional private between 15 to 20%. And so the extent to which other institutions might be going out with additional aid or additional incentives to get students to switch. I think we all as enrollment managers would be silly to think that, we're not going to be looking at a very trying and tumultuous summer. So we need to do everything that we possibly can to engage with and connect and make sure that as high of a percentage as possible of those students who have committed remain with us at our institutions.
Yeah. And Gail, from your standpoint, from the Marcom side of things, how have your efforts either changed or differed this year based on what Bryan just described in terms of the national sort of picture that we're in?
Right. So, here at Hartwick, I started the conversation about MELT a couple of years ago when I first joined this community. And for one reason or another, we, made some small changes to the communications that were going out to students and made a little bit of movement. But I think this year, and as Bryan points out, the situation in enrollment management and recruitment is so challenging that we really needed to look at our MELT communications and the storytelling we were doing for students coming in and their families. And so this year has been critical. And I would say for one reason or another, we haven't really put as much focus on MELT as we are doing this year. And I am really fortunate to have Bryan as a partner in this work because it takes, the two teams, the on the ground team and Bryan's team and my team who, are support of the team on the ground to be able to work together to address some of the storytelling that we really need to have in the marketplace for our prospective, our accepted students.
And Shane, just to jump in, one of the things that is really important for any of the listeners out there that are thinking about creating an enhanced culture around MELT, you've got to know your numbers. You've got to start with data and show people the data. And so I've been at Hartwick for about a year, but last June, the end of June, when I came to Hartwick, I put together some numbers and I began to share some numbers. So in 2022, Hartwick had a melt rate of 13.7%. We looked at our average net tuition revenue per student that year, looked at the number of students that were lost, and we shared with the community that actually cost $138,000 in lost revenue in that year. In our first year, fall 2023, and kind of putting some new strategies together to reduce melt, we brought our rate down from 13.7% to 11.2%. That resulted in 11 fewer students who melted. And so we were able to show the community this kind of cost of, they saved the institution $121,000. Still, as a result of the students that melted, we lost $550,000 in net tuition revenue, but we saved $121,000 as a result of the students that we did reach out to and improve upon. And so that was able to get the community to see the results of their effort, and allowed us to set then a goal this year of reducing our melt to 10% and put some financial figures around that to build a really strong cross-divisional melt plan.
And so were these initiatives, and Gail, you mentioned some of the storytelling and communications, were these in reaction to the FAFSA issue, or was this sort of, you saw this as a strategic initiative even well before what we have going on now?
Well, yeah, even well before what we had going out. I think what we did is there's really kind of three components to our plan, at a high level. So I think the first component is individual group meeting with and identifying students of concern early on. And I think that was our magic pill last year, was increasing communication and collaboration between enrollment management, academic affairs, looking at students of concern, using technology. We actually have a live spreadsheet that comes out of Colleague, our ERP system, that identified last summer who were the students that didn't complete their health form, who were the students that didn't complete their NCAA compliance form, who were the ones that didn't do their course planning guide. And in an organized manner, looking at those variables, we were able to, because we were a small college, basically triage, do personal outreach, and get more of those things completed in time for the students to enroll. So that was just point one. Point two really started this year, well before the FAFSA fiasco piece. I mean, we knew there was going to be a FAFSA delay, but we didn't know it was going to be such a fiasco. In engaging the campus community in what we call process mapping, we found that across departments around the college, we had a lot of great oral histories passed down from employee to employee without any documentation of how processes work. And so we actually formed a MELT committee in January, right after the new year. And it was co-chaired by myself, our new director of business systems, who recently joined Hartwick, and then our longstanding university registrar. Both of those individuals had some background in history in creating process maps. And that's where we started with this MELT committee, is we asked the major departments around campus, student accounts, registrar, financial aid, health center, if they would engage in a process mapping activity. And we accomplished that. We have now this expansive electronic folder of a process map that gives an overview of how every office interacts with our accepted students. And as you can imagine, Shane, we began instantly identifying, redundancies, hole, gap, places where things just weren't working. So that's part two. And then part three, as Gail talked about, that's where she and her colleagues have really come in, is taking the learnings from those process mapping activities and really generating a much more holistic, branded Hartwick College, communication flow, where students and parents are hopefully now receiving communications that seems like are coordinated and aligned, from one college.
Yeah, and Bryan, just for the listeners out there, talk about the effort level of that process mapping activity, and what kind of lift was that for colleagues across campus?
It was a big lift for us, for the MELT committee, for me and Connie and Matt, to kind of think through strategically on how we were going to present the activity and how we were going to do it in a way that wouldn't put people on the defensive, make them feel that we were going to call out things that were going wrong. And so what we did is we actually started doing it in admissions and financial aid. And so when we went to the first meeting, we actually had an example of process mapping, and we actually poke holes in things that the admissions office was doing and the financial aid office was doing that could be improved upon. So we just kind of showed the rest of the offices right away that we were willing to go first, and we were willing to kind of call to attention that, in enrollment management, we're not perfect and we weren't expecting other offices. To answer your question concisely, though, it wasn't a huge effort for the offices that were engaging in the meetings. They had to give about an hour time to outline, the things that we were doing. It was a huge amount of work, though, for our director of business systems and our registrar, because after each of those meetings, the two of them then had to probably do another hour to 2 hours of work, documenting what they thought they heard and then going back and forth with those offices, giving them a round of edits and revisions until they got it to the right place. So it was a big amount of work. It took a lot of, but I'm telling you, I was feeling at the end of this process, like, all right, well, how are we going to really inspire people to take action? But people felt heard. They felt listened to. Those other offices were immediately bringing out in our committee meetings, wow, this is going to help us with our accreditation. This is going to help us with our strategic planning over the summer. And this is going to help other offices collaborate in other ways. So, Shane, there were benefits in terms of people's morale and attitude around it that I wasn't expecting.
I bet finding easy fixes and things like that you didn't even think about before that really turned out to be positives.
And I think we did it in a way that we explained it very well. I think Bryan and his team did an excellent job of explaining to people what we were going to be doing and what process mapping means. Knowing what we send and when we send it is key to my area as storytellers, is because we need to know what people already understand about the situation or details or what deadlines are coming up. And I think the truth of the matter is that we hadn't done this before, where, as Bryan said, we engaged our colleagues across the board in various offices in this process. We were asking them for their input. And, initially, like everybody, you're not sure about change. You go into the conversations maybe a little edgy. But I think by the end of those conversations, people realized that they were really contributing to a better way of telling our story to our incoming families and the students. That was, from even a timeline perspective, made sense. We weren't dropping things on people, the first 3 days of the week and then nothing for the next 2 weeks. We were trying to make sure that the communications was consistent, that there are timely pieces that can be combined. And I think people appreciated that because, again, like operations, sometimes you get siloed. People work in silos and, this gave them an opportunity to break out of that silo and to contribute across the board to something that was better. And the bottom line is people want to do that. They want to contribute to something that's going to be better and make their lives easier. And this certainly did that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's why we're here, to break out of those silos. So
yes,
exactly. So perfect. Yeah, perfect topic. And we're we're kind of talking about it now, but obviously this, we're talking about specifically the enrollment and marketing piece of things, but this involved the entire campus, it sounds like, or close to it. So Gail, from your standpoint and your team, talk about sort of bridging the gaps between different areas across campus and how you went about that process.
Yeah, so I think, again, starting with this process of process mapping gave people an idea as to, that there is science behind it. In other words, there's a method in it for the madness, as it were. And it did involve across the board collaboration and input and support from our colleagues across the campus environment. But I think, as Bryan and I try to impress upon our senior leadership team colleagues as well, was that we were setting the stage for this process. We were collaborating. He and I were collaborating. The senior leadership team members were collaborating amongst themselves, and they set the tone for some of the conversations that then filtered down. When there's a sort of anxiety between divisions, and people can tell. And in our case, I think we did, I don't want to pat myself on the back here, but I think just from our conversations that Bryan and I had, and Bryan and our other colleagues on the senior leadership team had with one another, we've all really committed ourselves to working differently, to collaborate more effectively. And that sets the pace. In the last couple of weeks, just working with our colleagues in various offices. For instance, last week, we redesigned some materials that had been 4 separate pieces of paper that then we were able to, one of my designers was able to take and streamline it into a really cool looking, tabloid size piece that, initially I'm sure somebody coming along and saying, right, we need to get, we need to do something with these 4 pieces of paper. Kind of was a little nerve-wracking for folks who had been using the same paperwork from year to year to year. What are they going to do with it? How's it going to look? And we were able to take that material and blend it into one piece that I think the individuals who worked with us in this particular office were really pleased about how it looked, because it truly then was branded properly. It matched the rest of the materials that families and students were seeing in this entire experience with us to this date. And so when they saw it and they saw how to blend it in with everything else, I think that really showed them that all this work, this process mapping, these conversations, this collaboration, this contributing to this rather large experience was well worth it. And quite frankly, we're always looking at is what's the benefit to the student and the family. And in this particular case, it was a coherent piece of information that was going to them in a concise way, and it looked really, really nice and represented us well. So from that perspective, working across divisions, working across with our advancement colleagues and in various offices and programs, I think is so key to this work. And you have to kind of go into it knowing that you're going to have to give a little bit, take a little bit, collaborate, and have some hard conversations and be willing to have them. And as I say, Bryan and I have worked really, really hard on establishing a good relationship with our colleagues at the senior leadership team and setting the pace for how the rest of the relationships should go and do go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the examples that both of you have given so far. Bryan, from you talking about leading this committee and really being the first to say, "Hey, here's our process map, and here we're willing to do the same work." And then Gail, your example from a marketing standpoint, this is, I think, summer melt is a concept that is maybe a little bit more difficult to conceptualize for people. Like we're at Muhlenberg, we're doing a website redesign upcoming. That one's pretty easy to kind of see what the finished product is going to be. For this, it took a little bit more kind of partnership and collaboration to get that maybe a nebulous concept a little bit more concrete.
Yeah. I will say though, at a higher level, Gail strikes on such a good point about collaboration at the senior leadership level, and how many people around Hartwick have said to me personally that they feel the difference with our current senior leader. We really like each other. We enjoy working together. So they feel like we're just one college, that they're less part of a division, and more part of a college. I think the other thing that helped is, I started off talking about the numbers, but, we've been having a series of community conversations at Hartwick since the beginning of last fall. And I had a chance from an enrollment management perspective to talk about the history of enrollment management, why enrollment management is important, kind of the art and the science. And through those conversations, one of the key takeaways that we had in a discussion as a community is that as a regional private in the middle of upstate New York, we're battling every externality possible, demographics, change in consumer mindset, tuition discounting practices. And so while we have so much to be proud of in terms of our recent results and our long-term history, the community has also acknowledged the fact that continuing to do the same thing over and over and over again is just not going to be the path forward for Hartwick. So there was buy-in at the high level, even before we got to the MELT committee, that we all agree as a community, we have to do some things differently. And so I think that has also helped us with our MELT.
I agree, Bryan.
So Bryan, you touched on, shifting gears here, you touched already on the process mapping, and we've talked about the marketing piece of things. In our pre-interview, you mentioned 2 other kind of key components to this, which were the actual admissions work and student success work. So if you could give us an overview of those processes as well.
Yeah, certainly on the admission side, there's no getting through relationship building, right? And we've got to know our student. So we have ongoing trainings as part of our summer MELT effort, but as part of our own professional development with our teams about, the relationship between a vendor versus a trusted advisor. And of course, seeing ourselves as trusted advisors what does that mean? We've got to understand the pain point of our admitted students and our deposited students. And we've got to be putting ourselves in a position so that when they do have questions or doubts or concerns, or they get offers from other schools, that they trust us to the extent to which, they're reaching out to us and having conversation. We also have conversation as admissions teams about proactively what might be some of the things that are concerning our students at the time. So one of those things, just to give a practical example, is, we know that students want to see their residence halls and potentially meet their roommates as soon as possible. And so we created a residence hall preview day. So pretty early on, the month of July, students deposited and are living in our residence halls come, they do a preview of their residence halls. We make it easy for them to coordinate with their potential roommate if they'd like to, so they can look at the rooms together. But we allow parents to come in with their tape measures, and do all their stuff and kind of take care of all those details and logistics, a good 6-8 weeks before they actually move in to hopefully quell some of those concerns. Another great program that we have is we have a startup program for students who may be neurodivergent or on the spectrum. And we actually have a program where those students move in a full week before our Wick week. And it's kind of what we call our low sensory move-in experience. And so smaller group, we kind of curate orientation for them in a quiet, more manageable environment. So by the time we do have our full Wick week, where we have the games and the big group orientation activities, those students that need a little bit more calm and a little bit more personal one-on-one have had a chance to orient themselves to campus. So they're not feeling so overwhelmed during that initial Wick week activity.
Yeah, I really love that idea of the low sensory week. That's really thoughtful and well done. That's great. So you mentioned Wick Week, and that was the next topic we were gonna discuss. So tell us about Wick Week, and Bryan, I'll start with you, and then Gail, we'll talk about your involvement. But tell us about Wick Week at Hartwick.
Yeah, well, one of the really great things about Hartwick, we're 225 years old, and I've never worked at an institution that is so steeped in tradition and history, both longstanding but also new traditions. So Wick Week is packed with some of those traditions. We have an opening ceremony, which students kind of sign a pledge book. We have a first walk where students get to do kind of a walk down Founder's Way, which is kind of this first step. And then during the last day of classes, they have like a last walk. We do a lot of activities geared on helping students not only meet friends and classmates, but to kind of understand their positionality and how they might fit in an equitable and open environment such as Hartwick. So we do have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging lens. We have no activities for them to make sure that they understand their finances and their bill. We have activities engaged for them to understand the local community and the resources that are offered to them. And then, of course, time for them to just relax and unwind the full week of our first year students and our campus, where they're just really made to feel special, part of our campus.
Yeah, I would say it's a really nice mix of using tradition, first walk, convocation, the signing of the Hartwick book. But then we also add in new things, the information, the programs, and just equipping students with what they need to know to be successful students here. And we also don't want to overwhelm them, right? Because they're new to college. They're new to this experience. It's mind-blowing. And if you inundate them with too much information, it's going to last for about 2 seconds and then it's gone. So trying to balance that, how much is overload versus information that they really need to know to be part of this community. Mixing in the tradition. I mean, we have seminars and workshops and, just opportunities for people to get to know what's expected of themselves, but also that there's plenty of opportunities for them to get to know each other. And of course, to have fun. Because, you're coming to college to have this wonderful experience. And it is experience in the broadest sense. You've got academics. You've got, this experience in the next 4 years of growing as a person and becoming this individual who's going to go out there and do awesome things. And, impressing upon them from day one. It's like, there's this measure of how much is too much and how much is too little. And I think our colleagues have, over the years, being able to balance this sense of too much information, too little information, and we've got a really nice sweet spot, and we call it this Wick Week sweet spot. And again, and this lovely balance of tradition, new stuff, old stuff. And again, just making sure that the students in those first couple of days have fun.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, I love this initiative, and it's reminding me of my time in undergraduate. I went to East Stroudsburg University in the Pocono Mountains, and I remember about maybe a month before we got to campus, we had an overnight on campus with not necessarily our roommate, but somebody randomly assigned. And it just was such a nice way to meet new people and know that you were going to have a friendly face. And there was other activities during that opening week as well, but it's just giving me this sense of welcome. And I love that. So as we're recording this episode, we are really in the thick of summer melt season. And so for our listeners, Gail, I'll start with you. What lessons have you learned? What advice would you give folks listening, trying to tackle something like summer melt on their campus?
Yeah, so I would say, my advice is not necessarily about the MELT project and the MELT initiative and the MELT work that we're doing, but just about the process of working with colleagues across the board, and particularly enrollment, right? So it's not a silver bullet, this, what I'm saying, but it's day in and day out collaboration and being supportive across the board with our colleagues. Bryan and I meet regularly. We're as senior members of the leadership team. We have these conversations all year round. So we raise, sort of laying the groundwork for the kind of relationships that an initiative, any initiative, whether it's MELT, whether it's incoming, dealing with Wick Week, or whether it's commencements, whatever, the respect for each other and our respective expertise, I think, is something that is a foundation for the work that we do ongoing. We try to keep our meetings light. We've both got good senses of humor, I think.
I do,
and I think that goes a long way. Yeah, that's true. Weird sense of humor, but he's got a really good sense of humor. And thank goodness it sort of jibes with my offbeat kind of sense of humor too. But, when things get crazy and you've got a sense of humor and you're able to, and you really built up a good relationship and you have confidence and trust in your colleagues, I think that's super, super helpful. I mean, I've been in communications for some time, and I've been fortunate to work with some really wonderful colleagues in enrollment. And it's important for us, the two of us, to set the example about how our respective teams need to head it off and work with one another. And so I'm really, really lucky that in Bryan's case, we've both respect each other's background and,
Yeah, and I love that. And you both have mentioned that now, sort of leading by example from, a cabinet level position, and that laying that, you mentioned the word foundation just now, Gail, and that's really kind of what this podcast is about. Not just when there's a project that needs to be done working across silos, but really developing those relationships and you two doing that from where you're sitting in the institution really seems like it's sort of trickling down to your teams.
I think so.
Yeah. I actually did my research on my dissertation at USC, and part of this was research that shows when senior leaders have professional relationships that extend in appropriate ways outside of their professional relationship, and they care about each other's lives and spend some intentional time asking each other on how they're doing, that actually work productivity increases a great deal. And I think a lot of the work that Gail and myself and some of our other senior leader colleagues at Hartwick are really strong examples of that. For me, my advice would be more specific to the MELT. And I'll keep it simple. And I have to constantly remind my team that Rome wasn't built in a day. I know that's a little cliche statement, but I do think that anyone listening to this podcast and thinking they want to kind of clean up their MELT reduction program and get everything perfect, it's an imperfect science, and I do think it's a multi-year vision that you have to have. And I guess I'll just kind of keep with the random cliches out there. And I think Kenny Rogers said it the best when he said, you've got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And I'd also say that to my team too, with these meltdowns. Sometimes we've got to just let other people kind of have their way for this year. We've got to really understand what are the battles worth fighting, what are the battles worth not fighting, and, get a couple wins each cycle, and then document the places that you want to go back to and come back to it the next year. So even with this year, some of my team members said, Bryan, I'm so surprised that you were okay with like that office sending out a paper packet. Like that's not like, and I just said, look at how much progress we made. Look at how collaborative they were. Look at how much change we made. Like this year, let them send out the paper packet because it's important to them. This is just an example, by the way. But then next year, because we built up the goodwill, we'll go after the paper packet, and we'll make sure that we eliminate it. But it can't just happen all in one fell swoop,
The philosophy that we both subscribe to are, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time,
Yeah,
That's right.
and I agree completely. Trying to change everything everybody is doing right away is not going to get you very far. Well, Gail and Bryan, thank you both so much. I could tell just by our conversations together that you both have such a great working and friendly relationship, and it's really nice to see from two senior level executives within an institution. So I think you've got some lucky colleagues there at Hartwick.
Thanks so much. This was really fun.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Dave Cabilds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.